Hi everyone, welcome to our weekly segment called the Utopian and the Curmudgeon. It is our live stream with Jeffrey Tucker and Gene Epstein, and I'm particularly excited about today's segment. It is in the United States, it is Labor Day. I know a lot of you are tuning in internationally. Andy, you say that in India, Labor Day is May 1st. Well, today is Labor Day in the United States. And so what better time to discuss the labor theory of value? So our two Austrian economists here, Gene Epstein and Jeffrey Tucker, will be taking the reins and really unpacking this concept. It underlies a lot of socialist thought. It's like the linchpin of Marx's theory, and they'll be really unpacking that today and in some sense debunking it. If you are pro-labor theory of value in the comments, then feel free to chirp up and tell us your opinion. This is a lovely space to discuss these ideas. If you have questions for Gene or Jeffrey, as always, then let me know in the chat. I'm going to hop off the video and let Gene and Jeffrey take over, and I will join you guys in the chat.
Hi, Jeff. Happy Labor Day.
Yeah.
Why don't I give you the opportunity,
Yeah.
first of all, to explain.
Okay.
Probably doesn't take more than a few words to explain what is the labor theory of value.
No,
Tell us what it is,
Gene, you're going to be so excited about this because
what's the labor theory of value?
Well, no, I mean, like, can I just like back up just a second and explain why this even matters, right? Because
you before defining it, you want to tell us what it is. You want to assume that everybody knows what it is, Jeff. I'm sorry, I'm waving my hands to get the.
Okay,
tell us what it is, Jeff.
Okay. The idea of the labor theory of value is that things are valuable because of the work inputs you put into them. It's a mechanistic theory that somehow things obtain value because we're working for them. Which
come on. Labor gives value to goods and services.
Yeah.
And that labor time is what gives value to goods and services.
Yeah.
It's all about labor.
I know.
The value of things is based upon the labor
right.
to them. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But so you know what's weird about this is that maybe the way you and I have just formulated it, it seems obviously wrong. You know, but the thing is that we have to remember that economists, believed this theory for centuries. And not just Karl Marx, but to some extent, Adam Smith dabbled in it,
Absolutely.
and then
deeply dabbled. It was a deeply dabble.
Yeah,
deeply dabbled in it.
Right.
Capitalists and landlords, as I've tried to explain to those Smith lovers. But go ahead.
But so what I want to tell you is this. So I woke up today. I thought, well, it's Labor Day. What's to write about? It's another stupid day. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. There's a theory out there that Bitcoin is valuable because of the proof of work standard. I've heard people say this. It's just a lazy way of saying, like, why is Bitcoin valuable? Which is an interesting question. It's like magic internet money math.
Yeah.
Why is it $7,000 today for each unit, mathematically defined? And some people say, well, it's because of the proof of work hash system of permitting access, authority to access the chain, the ledger, and change it.
Yeah.
And so get this. This is what I think is going to amuse you.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, before you write an article, you have to like Google around, right, to make sure that you're not making up a straw man, right? Yeah, right. So I Googled around and I found like the best article ever on the P2P Foundation website, which is kind of a big deal. And the guy says, get this. Austrian Economics does not explain Bitcoin's value. Only Marxism explains Bitcoin's value because Marx had a labor theory of value, and Bitcoin uses a proof of work standard of authority and access to the ledger. So therefore, Marxism explains Bitcoin's value, and without that work, the value would be zero. Therefore, the labor theory of value. And he goes further to say that in fact, it's not just Bitcoin, but all things are related, are given value by virtue of labor inputs, And so this was just very exciting for me because I needed my bête noire. I'm sorry, do you know that phrase?
Your bête noire, that's French. Your bête noire. You're black. Unfortunately, it's black beast, bête noire, for those who don't know the French. Oh, that's great, Jeff. I guess I think that's a very clever point. I really like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Right?
I want to put that out there and then circle back to it. Bear with me a moment.
Sure.
Quite a while back, when I was arguing the labor theory of value with somebody who believed in it, he was fixed on really the issue of positive economics. Positive economics meaning being that you know all economic truths from the empirical data. It's absolutely true, by the way, and I'll explain why it's even truer than perhaps people understand. Is that there's a definitely high correlation, a high R squared, statistically significant relationship between the amount of labor that goes into a good or service and the actual price and value of that good or service. That's empirically true, and bear in mind, by the way, that Marxists. I mean, I read Paul Sweezy more than Marxist Paul Sweezy more than I read Marx, but of course they were cognizant of the fact that a high skilled person, a physician, say, has a lot of labor time behind him in terms of training, and so you have to count the fact that labor went into enhancing that person's skills and all that. So if you include the fact that high skilled people have labor time behind them when they were training and when others were working to teach them, then you do find a high correlation. So what I find fascinating is that, as well, is that this gets back to the key Austrian insight, which is that basically what we believe about economics comes from a priori reflection, because empirically you could sort of demonstrate. You could, of course, cite. You could cite the exceptions and point out, for example, that absolutely untouched land, if it's very fertile land, say, if it has a lot of oil, you're going to pay something for it, even though no labor has gone into it as yet. I mean, then of course the Marxists might say, well, but the potential labor that could go into it. Well, my point is that at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of asking you this, or going back in the anecdote that's to come from, let's say, the Caruso and Friday economy. Let's say that they spend a lot of labor time trying to construct a sail that will get their fishing boat out to waters where they can fish more deeply and catch more fish. They work a week on it, but then it turns out the sail doesn't work. It screws up. The boat goes in the wrong direction. They've got to start from scratch. The whole week they spent building the sail was a complete waste of time. Now, obviously, even though, by the way, they know, of course, what they would like to consume, they were building this capital good. It was a waste of time. It didn't work. And they know, of course, that all the labor time they put into producing this thing it does not help. It's of no value to them. And of course, you and I could cite many examples. You build a refrigerator and nobody can open it, and so nobody can get access to what's inside. I mean, obviously, it doesn't matter how much labor time you put into something. If it's of no value to somebody at the end of the day. So all we can really do is argue from anecdote, because we know that in a market economy, certainly there's an orientation toward producing things that people will probably want. And so there is a definite connection because of the market economy. But all we can really say to these people is that if you were Caruso and Friday, you produce something that doesn't work at all, it was a complete waste of time, that sale that I mentioned, then what difference does it make all the labor time you put into it? Doesn't that mean to you that all the value we put on goods and services comes from subjective value? How much value do we place on this thing? Or to use another example, say that the whole world went kosher overnight in terms of its taste and food, not in terms of the rules about the food that it wants to consume. Then now, obviously, to Orthodox Jewish people, pork is of no value to them. It's treif. They will not eat it. It's a bad. It's not a good. They bury it, and if everyone went kosher overnight, then clearly all the food that was produced the day before that's not kosher is going to be a complete waste. All that labor time. Now, obviously, I don't need to convince you, Jeff.
No, but I appreciate listening.
My point is that's the only way to convince people through mental experiments, because this guy kept hammering me with the idea that the correlation is obvious. So,
Look, I don't think you, in the first place, Caruso was a tenor. Crusoe was the guy on the island.
Enrico Caruso, he's making a dumb joke. Enrico. But anyway,
No, it's not a joke. It's I'm referencing your crazy
the
mispronunciation.
Caruso economy, Robinson Crusoe, not Enrico Caruso, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, but those are different words. Caruso and Crusoe are
Oh, I
different.
mispronounced.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you keep
folks.
saying Caruso, and I'm afraid our listeners are
Jeff,
thinking
my God,
about music and
Jeff
opera.
tough to debate with. He gets you on a mispronunciation of a last name.
No, but it's a silly. Anyway,
What? My point is, Jeff. My point is that that's the only way to address the Marxists. What I just said is the only way to address the Marxists.
Okay, but I'm not. Well, just a couple of points. One is this mistake about Crusoe versus Caruso is as common as the labor theory of value, so you shouldn't feel bad. The second thing is, I don't think you need to go all the way towards, the deductive basis of economic theory just to demonstrate a simple post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy.
What's your refutation?
Well, I think it's just simply a matter of a mix-up of cause and effect. It's not complicated.
Why is it a mix-up of cause and effect?
Well, it's a mix-up of cause and effect because people assume that because something happens after something else, that therefore it must have caused it. And that's just completely wrong.
That's a necessary but not sufficient condition. A cause always has to happen prior. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition. So then the next step, indeed, but then maybe the place to burn on them is a little silly. My point is, it's simply a matter of what I just said. It's simply a matter of trying to give them example after example to show them that I'll tell you. I mean, for example, Thomas Piketty's book on capitalist wealth, it was of no value to me, but of course I obviously had to read it in order to refute it for others. And so there's a lot of stuff that's of no value. I wouldn't buy it at all. And of course, if everybody were like me, then it would collapse. But so therefore, and of course, you'd say to the Marxists, do you really think that what Jeff Tucker says about the free market is of any value to you? It's really just it's trying to refute you. So therefore, again, you yourself as a Marxist believe in a subjective understanding that it's what your subjective consumption places.
Really, it just only takes you say mental experiments. I mean,
exactly.
Which is fine. But I mean, here's just a kind of an anecdotal example. Let's say that I have a cat that works very, very hard to cough up hairballs all the time.
Yeah,
like weeks of work that this cat has performed to cough up hairballs. I collect all the hairballs and decide to spend my entire Labor Day weekend baking them into cookies.
Oh.
Okay, so then I go into the market and I say, "Here's my hairball cookies." Now, neither of us have perfect predictive capacities, right? We can't predict the reality perfectly. Yeah, let's get that light back on. Right? Yeah, there we go.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm more or less guessing. It's a speculation that your hairball cookies are going to have no value in the marketplace, and in fact, are going to have negative value. They're just going to cause people to want to gag. And so when the next weekend arrives, you're going to say, wow, I'd sure like to spend the weekend making those hairball cookies because I really enjoyed that immensely. But I've learned that this is not valuable in the marketplace, so I better find something else to do with my value. So with my time. So that's the actual relationship between value and work, is that we're willing to work for things if we anticipate that in the future they're going to have value. If it turns out they don't, then we'll decline to do that. And it's no different with Bitcoin mining, right? I mean, the reason why people mine Bitcoin is because they anticipate that Bitcoin itself will be valuable once you obtain it. But if instead you get something called work coin, right? I mean, you've applied a ton of CPU power and you're paying, $5,000 electricity, and you get something called work coin, and you can't do anything with it. You can't send it to anyone. You can't convert it to any kind of goods or services, much less money. It's just a stupid numeraire. It's just sitting there. You will never mine it again. So that's a relationship between, and as you implied in your opening soliloquy, between value and work, is that the things that obtain value by virtue of the fact that people value them, which is to say that the value is imparted by the human mind and by the choices in the marketplace, and then works backwards. You're willing then to undertake whatever costs are associated with work, and work is always costly in order
used
to
the word value
create.
9 times in that sense, which didn't work. I thought it wasn't the most succinct sentence, Jeff. But to summarize, to cherry pick the good points in what you just said, which is that you have this harebrained idea that people are going to want to eat hairball cookies, and you bring them to market. That's because you honestly, in your naivete, imagine that people enjoy eating hairball cookies just as much as you do.
Or maybe you believe in the labor theory of value, and you think that if you work really hard at something, and your cat, has worked really hard at something, then therefore mechanistically and automatically, therefore, if you're a Marxist, then it's going to be a very valuable thing. In fact, the harder your cat coughs and the longer you cook.
And so it was completely worthless. And obviously the Marxists don't want to eat your hairball cookies either. And so clearly that demonstrates to them, hopefully, that this is of no value. And in a way, it's kind of a childish idea of the world, because the Marxist is sort of so submerged in the capitalist economy, the Marxist does not realize that most people have better intuitions than Jeff Tucker, and most people would not bring out hairball cookies in the first place, because that's the next part of what you're implying, which is that most people have their eye on the market. They see what sells, they see what people want to buy. And that's why indeed they find this empirical relationship.
What do you think accounts for the persistence of the idea? I understand that what you just said earlier, which I find is an interesting one, that there's an empirical relationship between work and labor time and market price. There is, but it's a reverse causation. I mean, it's like we're willing to work for things that obtain a high price. So we anticipate.
That's right. It is a reverse.
There's also a kind of so there isn't that intuition that's at work. There's also, tell me what you think about this. Is there a reluctance on the part of many people to acquiesce to the strange world that subjective theory of value gives us, in which essentially nothing has any kind of objective or inherent or intrinsic value at all, and we're all just sort of balancing in this sort of delicate world of speculation. All prices, all value, everything around us is entirely an extension of the human mind, and that living in that kind of world is sort of inherently alarming to us in some way. It's like there's too much uncertainty, too much I don't know. It seems almost nihilistic. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. No, indeed. When Eric Voorhees when Eric Voorhees debated Peter Schiff on Bitcoin, and Peter Schiff spoke about gold having intrinsic value, and then Eric Voorhees said, nothing has intrinsic value. Oil, until they discovered uses for oil had no intrinsic value.
Exactly.
And indeed, obviously, it's like rendering you rudderless. Similarly, the insistence on people, on the part of so many people, like, for example, a guy I admire otherwise in many ways, George Gilder, and that money has to have some sort of absolutely objective value. I mean, the idea that, and it's almost like a semi-theological belief that God has given us certain basics in life
what is his theory?
Cannot be altered.
I mean, have you followed his theory? I mean, it's very interesting to listen to, right?
Who's his theory?
George Gilder. But I've wondered several times about exactly what you said. That it seems to be an attempt to recreate some non-subjective theory of value. It's not quite a labor theory of value. It's like it's like a time theory of value, or
I mean, I'm just analogizing it. You make a good point that the whole idea that economics is sort of built on the quote unquote quicksand of subjectivity. That disturbs people, and,
it does.
And they like to latch on labor. Obviously, George Gilder is way too smart to believe in the labor theory of value. And he's a brilliant guy in lots of other ways, but taught me a few things. But indeed, latching upon money as some kind of, it's got to be the yardstick, the measure, and all of that is analogous. Absolutely, you're right. I want to introduce another point, a brief anecdote. It's also a matter of justice. Here's a typical story. It was quite a while back that I was looking with my then wife to rent a loft apartment, and this couple had spent a lot of time and money fixing it up, and then we looked at it dubiously at the result of what they had, and we said that we offered them a certain rent. We gave them a counter offer on the rent. and they turned it down. The wife looked at me with dismay and said, "That values our labor time at absolutely zero."
Yeah.
I wanted to tell them, look, dear, you put on all this time. It's just that we're not too impressed by the result.
I know. No, that's right.
Indeed, there is a certain thing that.
Well, and tell me this. Tell me if I'm right about this. But as you're talking, it suddenly occurs to me that labor theory of value is an applied version of a larger fallacy, which is that the cost determines price.
Yeah.
Yes. You agree with that?
Well, no, absolutely. And then, and actually, I have to think about that. There's certainly the idea that we have to grant the nuances. Certainly, the fact that it does. I'm trying to think. If it does take, if there are two goods that people will want, but then one good takes twice as much labor time to produce than another good, then clearly there will be greater scarcity of good B, the good that takes twice as much labor time, and so there is indeed a relationship between cost. That's
extremely circuitous, Gene. I'm gonna fix this problem for you right now. Okay, let's imagine this. I'm sure you live somewhere near a convenience store, right? And whereas 3 miles away there's a grocery store. So all the goods in the convenience store are maybe a third to half to 100% more expensive than the things that they. And so just stand out in front of the convenience store and say, "Excuse me, sir. Why do you suppose that everything's so expensive in the store relative to the grocery store out in the suburbs 3 miles away from here?" And I guarantee you that 9 out of 10 people will off the cuff say, "Oh, well, I have to think about that a second. Oh, it's because the rents are so high here."
No, well, because I wouldn't say it's just because the convenience store is more convenient. That's
that's right. But I mean, don't you think that most customers would say, thinking like, they're like Bastiat's mad economist, right? That is to immediately say, it's because the rents are so high, they got to pay the rent. But of course, this is again a flipping of cause and effect. It's precisely because people
you're buying the convenience.
People are willing to pay such high prices at that location that the rent is as high
because they are buying, because there's the extra service of the convenience. But let me throw this one at you, Jeff. In the oil market. There is a lot of oil is coming through fracking, through shale rock, and of course a lot of calculations about what's the price point where it's profitable, and the argument is that it's profitable at $40 a barrel. Now, obviously, the more conventional oil wells where you can take it right out of the ground, where you don't have to crack the rock and go through that expense, they're profitable at $10 a barrel. So. As far as I can see, it is valid to say that if the oil price stays below $35 a barrel for a year or 2 years or 3, then the shale, the fracking production is going to decline or dry up. And so therefore, the point is that we do need a price of 35 plus in order to keep the shale industry going. So I would think that means that then in that kind of natural resource, oil, which becomes increasingly expensive to mine, you will have a higher price, which has something to do with the greater cost of bringing the oil out of the ground via shale. Isn't that valid as far as it goes? So doesn't that mean there's a relationship between cost and price? In that sense,
I don't think that it's. It might. I think, as you say, it might be an empirical relationship, but I don't think it's a logical relationship. Hey, let's go back to Bitcoin for a second. Well, so the idea here that I've advanced is that the only reason why you apply work to manufacture something or to create something is because you anticipate you can sell it for a greater price, right, later. But and so many people claim that Bitcoin's only valuable because of the proof of work standard. So here's the thing. For the first 10 months of Bitcoin's existence, between January 2009 and October 2009, there was no value to Bitcoin whatsoever, and yet the proof of work was ongoing. So that creates an illusion that 10 months of work, you got to work, somehow then got magically imparted to this mathematical unit we call Bitcoin. But I think that's the wrong story. The actual story is that the people who have been supplying work for 10 months for no apparent reason were actually anticipating that if this works, Bitcoin could obtain a price on the market, and they were right.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that completely, and of course, let's indeed try to address directly this Bitcoin issue. The only thing I could add to your insights about Bitcoin is indeed that there was an expectation from the start, and there now continues to be an expectation that Bitcoin has a future in terms of its use value, and we could get into that interestingly.
That is interesting.
That it will be useful to people, and if that perception evaporates, if the belief in its being useful to people evaporates, then it doesn't matter how much labor you're going to put in. Bitcoin is going to become worthless.
Yeah, that's right. But there is that objective. There is an objective consideration here. If your costs are so consistently higher than the profitability of the thing that you're trying to do, like mine Bitcoin, then eventually the mining equipment's going to go into the dumpster, and that's in fact what happened in 2018. So many people ramped up mining infrastructure with the anticipation it was going to continue to go higher and higher. Then it fell back 75%. Suddenly all this equipment's in the trash, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a reality check here, right?
Yes. But let me go back. I mean, let me say about oil that if say we have some sort of miraculous breakthrough, and it turns out that wind and sun are better than oil in terms of driving our cars and doing the rest that oil does, and driving our manufacturing, then oil's value will collapse to zero. The competition will completely swamp it, and it doesn't matter how much investment has been made in fracking or in anything or oil wells. However, I do want to. You kissed off my point a little bit earlier.
Sorry.
As far as I can understand, you do begin with the fact that there is a demand for oil, and there is a willingness on the part of consumers to pay embedded in their gasoline price a $35 to $40 to at this point $60 price for oil. That consumers will pay it. But I don't understand why it still isn't true within that framework that if consumers are only willing to pay $10 embedded for the embedded price of crude oil, that the frackers simply won't be able to make a profit. They'll be operating at a loss, and the frackers will shut down. And so, therefore, there is a kind of a cost relationship. If you want more oil, you got to pay at least the $35 embedded in the gasoline price in order to get them to get up in the morning and produce it. So therefore there is a kind of a cost relationship to the price.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting and very subtle point, right? Yeah. I mean, it's this whole issue of cause and effect is not nearly as easy as it sounds once you're just tossing it out, because there is a very close relationship between cost and price over time, as long as you have market clearing. I mean, they look almost the same.
Yes, indeed. And I'm sure. I think if you want, let's take the surface industry known as sex work. And so clearly you've got to pay. Men and women, men who want gay sex, want to pay for gay sex, want to pay, and it's something that a lot of people are reluctant to do because there really is individual sovereignty, and the price has got to be pretty high, at least in an advanced industrial economy where there are many other things that attractive men and attractive women can do with their time, and it's a little bit demeaning. So they've got to be paid adequately to call forth that supply. So therefore, on the cost side, they have, and in that sense, actually, because it does get into the subjectivity of cost, because cost, I guess we could say, even in the fracking case, that cost is subjective. That the frackers want to make money; they're not going to do it for the love of it.
Yeah.
The sex workers find it. Many of them find it demeaning. Some are proud of their work. There's a mix, but they do command a high price in the capitalist market.
That's right. And there's something else that your commentary touches on that I think I'd like to flesh out for a second, is that you can't actually pass on your costs to the consumers. I mean, I don't know if you listen to the business news. Yes, you do. But it's just like the most annoying thing in the world, right? I mean, like you can't get away from this language about the costs of X, Y, and Z is going to be passed on to consumers. Like, how do you do that? I mean, people are just going to pay, the price they're willing to pay, and a lot of it, their willingness, it comes down to their what am I trying to say? There's a word, elasticity of demand, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which is an empirical, not an a priori concept.
Well, that's right. No, what I like is it's actually a capitalist plot. I mean, it's not because the New York Times has strong progressive leanings that they generally announce, due to rising costs, we have to increase the price of the New York Times. Now, obviously, capitalists love to say that because it's not because we're gouging. It's not because we feel as though we can raise our price. It's due to rising costs. That's just capitalism BS. And of course, my son was a freelancer, and he was talking to another freelancer. And he's talking about, well, how do you tell people you're raising your rates? And he said, you don't say. Do you say, well, due to rising costs, my rent is higher? No, you just say, I'm raising my rates for credit.
My opportunity costs have continued to work for you. I've gotten too high. I mean, I've got other people who are willing to pay me more, so you got to pay me more.
Well, that's fine. Other people and all the rest. No, you just simplify it for them and say, no, it's not due to rising costs, because then it would sound a little silly. But just because I'm just raising them.
Okay, so
that's okay.
So let me challenge you then on this point. Then okay, so you've got gasoline selling for $2 a gallon, and then suddenly government comes along and adds a $1 tax. What will you predict is going to happen to the price of gas, and why?
Oh my gosh! And you just said that obviously I left out. I was abstracting from the fact that there's a high tax embedded in the gasoline price, and so now you're asking me, what's the role of that tax?
I'm asking you, like, if gasoline on a free market is $2 and the government taxes it $1 a gallon, what would you expect to happen to the price, and why?
Well, gosh, I wish. Okay, fine. The demand for gasoline is relatively inelastic. However, definitely relatively inelastic. By the way, means, folks, that if a price goes from $2 to $3, the quantity that people will buy, that's a 50% rise in price from 2 to 3. The quantity that people will buy will not go down by 50%. It might go down by about 3%, 4%, hypothetically. That's relatively inelastic. They'll buy 94% as much, even though the price is increased by 50%. That's price inelastic, and that's roughly true of the gasoline market. Although, interestingly, over the longer term, the response will be that people will shift to more fuel-efficient cars and so on, smaller cars, and so therefore, and then the reaction will be even greater. So you're asking me what will happen to the West?
And why? So let me change this slightly.
Oh, you want to answer your own question? Go ahead.
No. I think your answer was exactly right.
Oh, okay.
Let me just add an additional consideration. What if the taxation on gasoline only applies to every other gas station? I mean, just like there's only half of them.
What? It's three. That's a real Tucker. It's $3 at one. First of all, as you probably know, as a matter of fact,
the retail price is not $3. It's that only half the gas stations have to pay $1 tax for every one they sell.
And the consumer doesn't. Oh my God!
Because what is the consumer? The consumer doesn't care. The consumer's just shopping for gas.
It pays the same price.
Tax applies not to consumers, but to the retail distributor of gas. But only half of them. What happens to the price then?
Oh my gosh, Jeff! I've known about this. It's a real Tuckerism. It sounds like rather a fanciful example. Does this have any real life application?
Yes, it does. My point is that if there's still market competition, like this tax has to be universally applied, because if there's still market competition, there is just no way you can, even in an illusory empirical sense, pass on the cost to consumers. What it means is that half the gas stations are going to go out of business, and the price of gas will stay $2. That's my prediction.
I see. Well, that's fair enough.
So
okay,
that's irrelevant, right?
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's we had a good Tucker tax catechism issues and rules. I want to shift gears. We may have kissed off labor value. I want to mention just the interesting history of use value versus exchange value.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Part of my issue with those who worship Adam Smith is not just that he thought that that profit is a deduction against wages. He specifically wrote this. Profits are a deduction against wages. The capitalist is a sheer exploiting predator. He literally wrote this in The Wealth of Nations. And that's one of the reasons why that book is written by a deeply ambivalent man, because it's got some great stuff in it. But then here's the funny story, which I think is worth telling, because most people don't realize it. In The Wealth of Nations, Smith was a complete Marxist with respect to use value versus exchange value. So Smith actually spoke about the diamond water paradox. He said that water is much more useful, much more valuable than diamonds. And yet, isn't it paradoxical that water is much cheaper?
Yeah, he did.
Therefore, Smith said, just make it clear to people so we don't go faster. Therefore, Smith said, there's use value and there's exchange value. The difference between use value and exchange value is that something like water has a lot of use, but it's got very low exchange value. Something like diamonds has far less use, but it's got a very high exchange value. And that's the paradox of use value versus exchange value. Completely indicted the free market with that one. Do you want to comment on that?
No, only to say that I think it's I vaguely remember. I almost wished I had reread Wealth of Nations in anticipation of this conversation, because I somehow thought this was going to come up. But every time I read Smith, I would find that he's more ambiguous on these questions than he's rumored to be. So I think it's interesting that you rendered him as drawing attention to a paradox, but not asserting something like, an objective theory of value or a labor theory of value, at least not in that particular case.
Okay. Well, he was unambiguous about wanting usury laws. He said he got page after page. They're discussing it. We need a cap on the interest rate of 5%. That's what he specifically said, a 5%. And then he was so out to lunch with respect to risk and reward, with respect to bondholders and investors, that he said that unless we do that, then people who will pay less will only pay 4% or 3% or 5% are not going to be able to borrow any money. And he didn't realize, of course, that the reason why some people have to borrow 10% is because their borrowings are very risky. A lot of people can borrow 3 and 4% because their borrowings are very safe. I run a very, very profitable tavern, and I can borrow 3 to 4% because people know, and other bondholders know, I pay them back regularly. So he was so bear in mind, forget the ambiguity. Smith specifically wanted usury laws, the worst price control of all. He specifically said that profits are a deduction against wages. He specifically hated landlords. All of that is in his book. But let me tell you, and he was very, very specific about saying that there's a difference between use value and exchange value.
So that's interesting.
But let me finish the story. This is they talk about the Adam Smith problem and mystery, and that usually means the mystery of what he said in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, another book of his, and The Wealth of Nations. I don't think it's much of a mystery, by the way. There's a lot of good stuff in Theory of Moral Sentiments, a lot of good stuff in The Wealth of Nations, and I think they're easily reconcilable. In fact, he first used the great phrase, the invisible hand, in The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
That's right.
Interestingly enough. But he believed in compassion, all kinds of good things, and often very eloquently presented. But absolutely. But let me tell you the really wild story. I couldn't believe it when Murray Rothbard. I had difficulty believing it when Murray Rothbard wrote in his own history, where he absolutely lambasted Adam Smith, went way overboard because he didn't recognize enough of the great stuff in Adam Smith. In Murray Rothbard's history of economic thought, Rothbard said the amazing thing is that when Smith delivered his economics lectures before publishing The Wealth of Nations, he mentioned this supposed paradox between use value and exchange value. And then he specifically said in his lectures, well, of course, the answer is that water is extremely abundant. We have so much water. Diamonds are very, very scarce. That's why. So here's the amazing thing. And you know how we know this? I then had to check it. I came across a book of lecture notes from Smith's lectures. There was a guy who attended Smith's lectures who took it down in notes. And this was in his notes from Smith's lectures, that's what Smith said. So the amazing thing is that what I couldn't believe is that Smith was so so sort of out to lunch crazy that he had resolved this diamond water paradox in his lectures, but didn't put it in his book.
No. Look, this is not a mystery. I mean, even the greatest thinkers can kind of miss the thing that matters most about things they've already thought about. You know, I mean, it's
in the face. It's just the face. I almost wonder, because the only evidence we have that Smith actually said this in his lectures is the lecture notes of one of his prize students.
I
don't know if Smith actually
it's not the human mind is complicated. You know, I mean, people can know something one day and then 6 months later forget it. I mean, you know what?
I don't know if you listeners, I don't know if you're interested in this stuff about Smith. He was deep. All you have to do is read The Wealth of Nations on its own merits, and you'll see this guy is deeply ambivalent about markets and about capitalism. Deeply ambivalent. Anybody who could, by the way, he also read Cantillon, Richard Cantillon, who written an essay on economics. Richard Cantillon mocked the usury laws. He talked about the fools who believe. He talked about how entrepreneurs can borrow at 20%. He talked about how people borrow at lower interest rates because they offer low risk. He spelled all this out. Smith actually cites Cantillon in his own book, The Wealth of Nations. He read this, and then he went on to say we need a 5% cap on interest rates.
And for the sake of our listeners, that is not Immanuel Cantillon. That's Richard Cantillon.
Great.
So just so that we're clear.
This guy was originally Irish. He was a Parisian.
Cantillon.
But he wrote in French. And Smith read French. He probably met Cantillon. He met some others. Anyway, we're inveighing against Smith.
I'm not inveighing against Smith because I mean there's just I love The Wealth of Nations, but I'm not here to dispute your characterization of him, but only to say that sometimes people can know something on Wednesday and forget about it on the following Thursday, and I think that was true with Smith and value theory, but just so we understand how easy it is to make a mistake in this realm, right? So you think you're going to go to Carl Menger and get all truth, like, oh, this guy's got it all figured out. For one thing, Carl Menger used Adam Smith as his book for tutoring the Crown Prince. All right, so he loved Adam Smith. Second thing is that in the chapter 1 of his book on economics, whatever it's called, Principles of Economics, he goes through value theory, and he's addressing the subjective theory of value. But you'll be astonished to read it. To discover that Menger thought he knew better than the market itself what was valuable. For example, he made the the classic mistake of every puritanical misogynist in history to devalue makeup.
Oh yeah, well,
I mean, so he's got this whole paragraph going. Well, clearly makeup is completely worthless, and this is just frippery and just ridiculous. And and he said this is clearly not a good; it's a bad. And and so the market is just making this wacky little mistake here, So I mean, even Carl Menger, is turns out to be subject to this.
Well, people who have, I mean, again, as I've said, Thomas Piketty's book is of no value to me, and let me kiss off a couple of points before I get into that. The next point I was going to do, that's fascinating about Menger, just the idea of people being so hubristic. I mean, obviously Smith was this way. Smith believed that court gestures, any service, I think all services were of no value as far as Smith was concerned. I want to say, Mr. Menger, Mr. Smith, just because it's of no value to you,
exactly,
does not mean it's of no value to others.
Oh, I know, exactly.
Have some respect for other people on the market. There are lots of things that are no value to me on the market, but they are of great value to others.
Exactly.
As I've said, Thomas Piketty's book was of no value to me. I had to buy it and read it because I had to refute it. But otherwise, it was. And
a classic case of what people are always citing as being something objectively valuable. They're usually related to religious texts, right? Yeah. So the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, these are inherently valuable things. And I mean, the response to that is that there, might have some spirit, some inherent spiritual value according to you, or a moral value or something like that. But we're talking about the individual unit on the marketplace, and in fact, even the Bible has zero price. I mean, you can go into any hotel and steal the Bible. The Gideons want you to take it with you. So I mean, that's like a zero price item.
You didn't say about the Quran, because then there'd be a fatwa on your life. But my point, actually, I just wanted to kiss off my point about it. It's just those, I debate people like Mark Skousen who believe that Smith was the founder and father of modern economics. And all I say was that he's in my Mount Rushmore. Because there's so much great stuff in his work. However, I would more characterize him not the father, but one of the drunken uncles.
Why? Because of Turgot? I'm sorry, but
because of Turgot. Because he said, Jeff, that profit is the deduction against wages. Because he hated landlords. Because he wanted a price control on the most ubiquitous price of all, the interest rate. That's why. That's why he's
the founding father. Are you saying there is no founding father, or that
there are a lot of drunken uncles like Menger, and there are a lot of there's a whole pantheon of people, including Smith, one of the founders, a number of people who Bastiat, and Mises and Menger and Kantian.
All of whom came later.
I'm talking about, look, Kantian, all you have to, you don't even have to
was earlier.
Kantian came earlier, Turgot came earlier. I'm just saying that we are leading with our chin. If we say this is the father and founder, if the father and founder wanted price controls on interest rates. By the way, Amartya Sen, the progressive Nobel Prize winner, celebrated Smith for his design in the New York Review of Books, in an article about economics and about the recent housing. Smith wanted a cap on interest rates, and because he understood the problem. He celebrated.
There's plenty of problems with Smith, but can we just not just speak about Smith as if to some sort of floating abstraction out there, and we're just picking among them like stars? I mean, Smith was embedded in a certain context. I mean, it was a context, not Jeff. He wrote a very big and beautiful book.
I'm not being anachronistic.
Liberalism
I'm not being anachronistic, Jeff. You're accusing me of that. Jeff, Kantian and Turgot had specifically mocked the usury laws. Kantian carried on in his essay about them. Entrepreneurs can borrow at 20%. Specifically explained why the usury laws were wrong. Publishing 20 years before Smith wrote, and Smith read, Smith read Kantian.
I'm sorry. My apologies for Adam Smith. Nonetheless, when you read him, and he wrote a very big and beautiful book. In fact, 2 big and beautiful books. What you come away with is not, let's crack down on the Jews. What you come away with. Yeah, well, right. I mean, I don't know what was the reason he was against the usury laws. I don't know. Was it his Calvinism?
To explain to you why he was against the usury, because he specifically said that credit-worthy people would not be able to borrow. That's what he specifically.
Well, Murray.
I'm not being anachronistic and condemning him because I'm saying that Kantian explained that credit-worthy people borrow at 4% because they offer safe investments.
Okay, I just don't think any thinker can be expected a priori to be perfect in every respect. Otherwise, there'd be no reason for advance in theory. And you're right.
You're setting up a straw man. You're setting up a straw man.
But I just don't want to. I don't want the results of this podcast to give the impression, that somehow, Adam Smith was some sort of celebrator of statism and cracking down.
Try to listen to me, Jeff. Try to listen to me. As I said, he's on my Mount Rushmore. I could quote all the great stuff.
Okay,
but but unfortunately, there's so much in Smith that's a riot of left-wing socialist argument, which I could that ambivalence was his middle name, and that the things I can cite having to do with capitalism, profits being a deduction against wages. that inspired, by the way, inspired Karl Marx by way of Ricardo.
True.
I'm only trying to talk about. I'm only trying to say that we have that if we keep talking about Smith being the father and founder, however imperfect, we are leading with our chin because a whole list of people have cited Smith against us.
I'm just. My point is that we could do a lot worse. And I tell you what, when you live in a world in which the most powerful man on the planet Earth thinks that wealth comes from building walls and mercantilism and national productivity rather than the division of labor, Smith becomes an important corrective. So I mean,
that's one of the reasons why he's on my Mount Rushmore.
Okay,
I agree, but I'm only saying that look, when I was asked from the floor about this, debating Marx, who's the single writer you would recommend if there was just one? I actually said Bastiat. I said, if you really want to read, I would recommend Bastiat because he was consistent and clear, but that's subjective. I would certainly also, I would not deny that passages of Smith, look, what he wrote about free markets, what he wrote about free trade is probably the best stuff on free trade.
Listen, that's true.
Yes,
also, his theory of moral sentiments is extremely important because, I mean, the number one thing that everybody accuses economics of today is wrongly thinking that as if all of our conclusions are hinged upon everybody acting in their rational self-interest, as defined by their material needs. You read the theory of moral sentiments, what you find is a very high level, sophisticated book in moral psychology that actually has some very challenging, I would say extremely interesting discussions of the origins of norms that govern our lives, and his, let me just a clue here. His conclusion is not that they come from Moses. All right, I mean they come out of human experience.
When I debated, I'll pick up on that, Jeff, because again, I want to agree that he's in my Mount Rushmore, albeit he's imperfect. He's a drunken uncle, but I want to emphasize that when I debated Yaron Brook on the virtue of selfishness, I quoted the line from Adam, because I pointed out to Yaron that the word selfish has always been a pejorative. Smith actually used the word selfish, how selfish soever man may be supposed, and then he went on to say that there's a deep compassion in his nature.
That's right.
So he contrasted being selfish with being compassionate, and by saying that this virtue can be found even in the worst brigand. That the giving, and indeed that is a powerful tradition.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Rand point. We don't have to dwell on it, but I mean, her use of the term selfish was. I mean, let's not forget that English was not her first language.
As I said to Jan, look, I said, let's not also forget that if you'd been raised in Bolshevism for the first 22 of your years, and if you were taught that it's selfish not to serve the state, you too might want to be shouting from the rooftops that selfishness is a virtue. I might want to. Let's make allowances for Ayn Rand.
Right.
I can't make those allowances for Yaron, but I make allowances for
exactly. That's exactly.
Try being raised in Bolshevism for the first 22 years of your life. Absolutely. But I want to shift gears, and I guess the few minutes remaining to us, Naomi is going to shut us up, having to do with I think the subtle issue of whether laborers deserve, whether capitalism affords people their just deserts. And I believe that Hayek really gave the answer to this one. We certainly can grant the qualification I would first make is to say that we would certainly grant that in so many cases, in a small workplace or in a large one, we would say this guy made a lot of money. But by and large, there's a correlation between what we would all say is it's merited. He worked hard. He took a lot of risks. Or the hardest workers in a company usually get paid better. Sometimes not. We have principles of justice in that regard. But Hayek argued in the second volume of his, it was The Mirage of Social Justice.
Yes.
The title he gave his second volume. I think at the end of the day, Hayek argued that, look, getting back, by the way, to the mysticism you speak of, he said, we long ago gave up on the just price. we have to give up on the just wage. And then when this was in lectures I delivered in which I was indicting Thomas Piketty for his book about capitalism and wealth. And I said, look, this book by Thomas Piketty is of no value to me, but he's made millions of euros from this book. And most people could get paid past page 22 based upon the Kindle evidence, but that didn't mean he has an obligation to give you your money back just because you couldn't get through it. That wasn't the deal. The man has made a fortune from it, and it's of no value. It's of no merit to me, but I can't take his money away from him. I can't inveigh against capitalist
that's right.
But the point is, I think the most dislocating feeling of all is to recognize that we have to respect the fact that a lot of people wanted to buy Thomas Piketty's book. A lot of people thought it was of value, thought he merited it, and we can't deny that.
Oh, for sure.
But we have to say at the end of the day that ultimately, as Hayek counsels, you're going to get yourself into a corner if you defend the distribution of income and wealth in a capitalist society based purely on anybody's concept of merit.
I see.
That was Hayek's main point.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
but I agree. Some people are going to buy Dogecoin. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Okay.
So, can I just before we leave this session, just a quick point that you touched on here in terms of wage determination, because this is hugely important. A lot of people like Tucker Carlson and some of your other right-wing friends these days are running around inveighing against the capitalist system, because I don't know if you've heard this, but the newest rap out there is that Amazon is evil because they're paying people too low wages, and they're only able to do this because the welfare state is picking up the slack and providing income to these people. Now, now this is very interesting because it's a classic sort of right-wing attack on the commercial society, right? I mean, it's like culturally appealing to people. So you're watching Fox News and you're like, oh, Tucker Carlson has shown me why Amazon is evil. Actually, they're underpaying their workers, and they're only able to do this because my tax dollars are shelling out for these bums. So therefore, that makes Jeff Bezos, like himself, a welfare client. You see the way it works?
Yes.
And I think that the answer to this is that this is a massive confusion about where wages come from. Wages are not set by a capitalist or entrepreneurial managerial decision concerning the financial plight of the workers. They're established based on the opportunity cost of the worker themselves, or actually that's the basis on which a person chooses to work, and also their value contribution to the firm itself. The problem is that these lowest paid workers at Amazon are not yet valuable enough, and so their wages aren't high enough. So according to the standards of the welfare state, they're still entitled to receive some benefits, but that has no bearing on what they're being paid by Amazon. And in fact, their work at Amazon is making a contribution to making their work more valuable, so that they can enter into a higher wage realm and eventually lose eligibility for the welfare. You see what I mean?
Well, as a matter of fact, I'm a big fan of Don Boudreaux and his on Cafe Hayek. As you know, Don writes these letters. I call them the Boudreauvian missives. I think he's a latter-day Bastiat. I love his stuff. And he's been addressing this point directly. In fact, he's gotten into a kerfuffle with Tucker Carlson, who's had some good stuff, but he's unfortunately gone with this idea that basically it boils down to the idea that one way of putting it would be, if there were no welfare subsidy, then Bezos would be higher wage. And I corresponded with people on Facebook about this. At one point I wrote, I said, let's choose one example. Let's say two people are living together, and person A supports them both. And so person B then is living off the welfare of person A. Then that person B goes off and gets a job. Are we supposed to think that the welfare payments for person A somehow affect what that person could be doing?
That's interesting.
I said, well, I thought that just to point out that just in terms of human interaction, if a husband or a wife, husband, let's say he's been the house husband, then he goes off to work, and he's been living off the wife's salary. How does the wife's welfare payments to the husband affect in any way what the marketplace will pay him. I mean, it really substitutes.
Right. It might affect the decision over the kind of job you would take, right?
Well, actually, as I say, actually, if anything, it means that well, the kind of job you take, you might it might mean that Bezos is overpaying because people can fall back on welfare and make it more rather than underpaying.
I see. Yeah, another example I'm thinking about. Let's say I'm the beneficiary of a great estate, and some my mother dies, and I'm a 100 millionaire because of oil royalties or whatever the hell. And now I can live out my dream of being a gardener.
Yeah.
And we're working at a very low salary, working at Walmart, and I don't know, tending to the plants or something, right? So that subsidizes.
Well, that's an odd example. Bear in mind that, again, the syllogism says that essentially the welfare payment is subsidizing Bezos because if you absent the welfare payment, then Bezos would have to pay more for this labor.
I see.
Pay more for this labor,
which is not true. I mean, that is essentially has nothing to do with each other. But it's also Tucker Carlson's.
But he might be paying less because, as I say, if anything, he might be paying less. But go ahead.
That's right as well. And also, I think it's part of a larger problem we're facing right now. And I don't know if you've detected this. And I've been writing about this for years. But the right wing in this country is becoming ever less friendly to the commercial society. I mean, what's her name? Life's that Laura Ingraham. Apparently the other day, at least I saw on Twitter, called for the nationalization of Facebook and Twitter, like for the government to take them over so as to protect access for her point of view. And now you got Tucker Carlson blasting Amazon. It's just so weird to me. And then and you've got Trump, laying into Harley Davidson, how dare you take your production out of this country? And remember,
Trump. You think Trump is a right winger? Trump is kind of impressed by himself.
But and then he was calling for a boycott of the iPhone, which is the same. That he and Bernie agree on that too. Yeah. So I mean, you've got this growing sort of rightist attack on the commercial marketplace, which just underscores my conviction that liberalism, as represented, yes, by Adam Smith, but also by many others, Bastiat, I think most preeminently, is really a kind of a third way. We're the only real defenders of people's human rights and liberties and the viability of the commercial society, the opportunity society to get rich and trade with other people and to have the freedom to associate with each other. I mean, ultimately, you can't depend on the left to do that. You can't depend on the right to do that. It's just us.
Well, no, indeed. Look, I have to say that the people at Wall Street Journal, the editorial writers, generally speaking, they're pretty free market.
Good.
I have to say, for example, George Will, who has happily sort of come over to our side. I wish, however, he would own up to all of the things that he wrote over the years, in particular that were offensive to me as a free market libertarian. For example, he actually talked about how government plans better. Now he's a Hayekian. That's great. I wonder if he remembers what he used to write. And of course, what is the fundamental problem? The fundamental problem with people of a strongly conservative bent is that the free market is very unsettling to them because the free market is sort of inherently radical. And the free market, all traditions can be upended, new products, new services. Obviously, I mentioned sex workers. That's on the free market.
There's no objective value.
But more especially, look, if you want to hold on to the conservative traditions that you love, then pay for them. And indeed, obviously, the market has obviously, we don't need landmarking of buildings, beautiful buildings, beautiful churches, all that stuff. There'd be plenty of money that would want to support them, but recognize that some of the things you love and cherish, like, look, I loved and cherished all those big Barnes and Noble stores, and now there are only one or two left in the city. What can I do? I was part of the problem. I buy my books on Amazon. I buy my books now from Kindle. So
my favorite kind of music is medieval polyphony. Nobody's willing to pay for it. So what am I going to do?
My point is that conservatives always have a problem with the radicalism of the free market. And they have to struggle with it.
I think that's right.
That's the reason why they're often just fellow travelers. But I guess with another part of them, I know much about Tucker Carlson, but you sort of think maybe in the back of your mind that with the rule of law, government can make a difference. They love our crazy compulsory school system, all the rest of it. And they probably think, oh, well, can't government make a few things right? Like, can't get Jeff Bezos to pay more to people by tax, they get confused in their mind because indeed, as you say, the free market leaves them a little bit rudderless.
I think that's right. And this is why people resist this subjective theory of value.
Yeah.
But Gene, it's been so lovely hanging out for you.
Sure.
Should we invite Sweet Naomi back on? And,
we've gone over time as usual. Naomi's often nice enough to say, please shut up, guys. We should probably shut up, Naomi.
You guys are so awesome. As I said last time, I'm always loath to interrupt because I just want to hear you guys going on. We've had a very lively chat in the live stream as well. A lot of differing opinions going back and forth. So that's been awesome to just hear people talk out these ideas.
And then you get the last word and no, and then obviously our labor time went into this, and whether it's of any value to you out there has nothing to do with the time that Jeff and I put in. You should know that.
That's the opposite.
When it applies
this is
to
a
us.
very expensive show for people to watch because so much labor went into it.
There she goes.
I'm going to be charging people for this episode. And Jeffrey, I'm really sorry that medieval polyphony, there's not a higher market wage for it because I love it. I love it so much. But it's just the way it is, the amount of labor that goes into something doesn't necessarily.
What are you gonna do? Some people prefer Dogecoin to Palestrina. I
know. What's with that? Just wanted to thank everyone for hanging out today. It's so wonderful to spend this holiday with you all and to be chatting about these ideas. And Jeffrey and Jean, you're just so wonderful, just getting right into the nuts and bolts of these ideas in a way that so many people can't. You're just so well read across the board. So it's just great to have your expertise and to be sharing them with people who are interested in these ideas and don't quite know where to start in exploring these different concepts. So thank you for being that point of contact for them for these new ideas and broadening minds and educating all of us. And for anyone who's interested tomorrow, I do have my live stream of my game show. I am always looking for contestants there. So if you're hanging out in my chat and you want to be part of the show, then just send me a message on Twitter and you can come on and be a contestant. That will be a heap of fun. And otherwise, go and enjoy your Monday and have a wonderful day. And thank you, Jeff and Jean and everyone for being here.
Thank you, Jean. It's great to see you. Thank you, Naomi. Bye-bye.
See ya.